Hello, everybody, and welcome to the afternoon session. I'm delighted that straight after lunch on the second day that we still have some people here. So clearly, when you started on day one, there were a few more people, but super. But we're going to have an exciting time together, myself and Hannah Perugic, and we'll talk you through some of the reality of implementing that transformational journey within an S4 context. So I'm Peter Franz. I'm the co-founder of a company called BPM-D, the BPM discipline, for those that don't know it. And I'll introduce briefly who we are, but today it's about saying, well, we're going to do an S4 transformation journey. Various people have told you, process matters. But why does process matter? Why can it add to that journey and actually make it easier rather than more complex? And how should we go about doing that? And I'll briefly cover that today and then show some examples, in particular the Philips DA example that Hannah will tell rather than me. We've assisted with that, but I think we'll let her tell that story. So BPMD, very briefly, we focus on the process of process management, the business process management capability. And we say that any organization going through massive change needs to have that transparency of process at its core. And we practically help you apply some of those process management principles. And it's based on two things. Firstly, a very solid framework, and we have a good academic base. We link to universities and all that cool stuff. I know it's boring, but it's based on sound principles. Myself, my co-founder, created this stuff over the last 10 years, and prior to that, we were responsible for that in one of the big consulting companies. So it comes with sound knowledge. All of that you're not excited about, because the reality is it's about implementing it and making it happen. And the bottom right, in my mind, is the most important. So we've done this with 70 plus Signavio customers, some of you in the room, and we've got real experience in not just the product, the function and feature, but how to make that enhance your process management journey. And some of the logos are shown on the right-hand side of this picture, which you might recognize. So we're going through an environment that is typified with significant change. Change driven by all kinds of things. And yesterday, Gero and Raman said to us, it's about moving faster than fast. Well, the environment is moving faster than fast. We have got an environment, being our organizations, as typified by the people and data and the regulation and its impact on us, the systems, customers, etc., that need to adapt. And that is a sometimes very complex network, and it's been built up over time. There's been multiple ramifications to it. It's not all simplified and synchronized and standardized. And it would be so good if we could just have that simple, standard, automated, and then we can apply change to it a whole lot easier. So how do you go about implementing change and doing that fast and reliably? Well, you need that process lens, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And the stat at the top, and there are multiple stats to this effect, that effectively say 70% of digital transformations fail. Who believes that stat? Okay, because why? It's about the 30% managed to actually achieve some of their strategic objectives. Maybe there are a few more that get the technology implemented, but the rest is to forget what the original mandate was and don't necessarily achieve the value that was set out to get there. Now, implementing a new ERP system, how often does that come about? Any thoughts, quickly, from the room? How often do you change an ERP system? So, and you're about to be told that between now and 25, you have to implement a new version of S4, otherwise you're going to not get support, right? So you're going to make that change. It is a once in a 7 to 12 year opportunity to implement change. And There's something of a, so we sponsored the gelato stand for a bit of a reason, so when you implement a new ERP system, you unfreeze the organization because you put them in an unknown zone for a period of time when this new ERP system is not implemented yet and they have to figure out how to implement it and use it, etc. And so the organization and all its historical memory is forgotten for a short period of time. It freezes up damn quickly again because the organizations are resilient. And you give them the new product and they say, okay, we know how we have to do this, we've done it over years, and so they implement the same stuff with workarounds or using the existing capability. And so you have the opportunity during that unfreeze zone for a short period of time to implement new behavior. And you'll say, well, we're going to simplify and use SAP out of the box and standards and back to basics, and I've heard various words around it. We're going to simplify, harmonize, etc. Yeah, maybe, if you can get the opportunity to do that. So how do you do that? And you can only do that and achieve kind of the ice cream. Now, achieve the new way of doing if you approach it in a valid way. And I think the starting point for me is recognizing that ultimately what we're trying to achieve is the end-to-end process and how that end-to-end process works and works well. That's what we're trying to achieve. Yes, no? I mean, we're not trying to make the finance payables work well. We're trying to make sure that the order to cash works well, or the procure to pay, if I get my payables versus receivables right. Yeah, so, but over time, what we've done is we've put it in by function. Why? Because it's taught at universities that way, and we have finance professionals, and we have operations professionals, and HR professionals. And then we underpin that with systems. And guess what the systems are built around? System processes. Well, what are those system processes? They're functional. And so, effectively what you have is functional implementations, and those processes that you're implementing are functionally oriented. And there are these big barriers between that nice end-to-end that the customer and your stakeholders care about. So ultimately what you're trying to do is break down those barriers, right? And so you need that focus on end-to-end process, and you need to streamline and get that working and be able to do that on a consistent basis. Well, that's a vision that we all sort of buy into. So, in terms of the approach, and I won't go through this in a lot of detail, on top of getting the IT story right, the system implementation, this band at the middle, what you need to make sure that you're doing is saying, at the outset, let's target where we're going to get the value from. Let's target what the end state needs to look like. Let's get clarity of those end-to-end processes and clarity as to how the technology will support it. Let's not just, so the standard implementation will go down a different path. We'll cover that in a minute. And then let's identify the 80-20, the 20% where we really want to be different. So the thing I have against those organizations or those individuals that say, we are trying to standardize and harmonize, we're going to use standard SAP, is that for 20% of the business, that is not good. So if you need to have real differentiation around your brand and your products related to certain activities, you need to identify those and innovate in those areas. And then the 80%, you do want to make sure that you are enforcing the back to basics and standard and all of those good things. And then the important thing is understanding the difference and then implementing the approach. Your implementation approach has to be different for those two streams. And around the top end stream, it is about innovation and new process design and figuring out how to improve it and align it. And the base of this is, it is standard SAP. Let's just identify maybe where the terminology needs to be adapted, etc. But ultimately, we're going to plug in standard SAP. So let me give you two examples. And the first is Most Tankers, and then I'll ask Hannah to talk about the second one, which is Philips. Most Tankers were implementing a new procurement system. And they were having some interaction with their supplier around implementing it, the ERP. And it was clear that there were some issues related to it. And there were different parts of the organization that were doing very different things. Getting clarity of that end-to-end process helped them identify exactly what the standard needed to look like. And then they were different. Most Tankers has this interesting concept of onboard warehousing. Well, what that means is that you've effectively got a warehouse that moves around the world. Well, that's a bit different to your standard procurement system, you know, so you need to clarify how you want to interact with that and what a good warehouse is and to be used, etc., over time. And there were functions like that that needed to be identified. And then we fleshed out the processes where it was standard and forced the organization with the head of technical input on it to go down that path and focus on the areas that were standard, while at the same time really differentiating on the areas of where it was going to be different and unique. And those areas we innovated around and worked with the supplier to get that innovation right. All documented on the Signavio environment and all used throughout the implementation process to gradually drive the use of procedures, training, testing, and ultimately into the adoption and KPI management, etc. And it's getting that thread working throughout. So that's one of the areas, one example of where it's happened. And I think the second example I'd like to cover is ask Hannah to talk through what's happened at Philips. Now, Philips started later in the cycle, and they were already running an SAP implementation. And what we needed to do was focus on, well, how are we going to use the Signavio world? And I think Hannah will take it from there.
Can you? Yes. My name is Hannah Proy. I am leading the QMS organization within Philips Domestic Appliances. And I actually got that unique opportunity that Peter was talking about. I got that ice cube. When Royal Philips decided to sell domestic appliances, I was asked if I wanted to join and build a new management system for the company that was fit for the use of the company, for the type of products that they were making, for the size that they had. So I was the unfrozen ice cube. Now I get to become an ice cream, which is really, really cool. I get the very unique opportunity, like I said, we're a new company, but we also are implementing an entirely new SAP suite. So I get to connect IT tools. 60 some new cloud applications. We have completely new ways of working that come with that. And we also had limited BPM capability, because that is something that at Royal Philips was done for us by a function. So we got the support of our colleagues at BPM-D, who are, on the one hand, helping us figure out how do I document those ways of working that are oftentimes directed and given by the IT tools that we have, regulators that we have, ISO compliance requirements and controls that we have, and how do we put that in one source of truth for all of our users to use, and not just for the BPM people or the process people. And I think this is an important one. It's not just for the process people, but who are the process people? Where are we at in this journey? So the process people are no longer people that sit in an ivory tower somewhere and dictate how we're going to do stuff. It's the people on the shop floor that are every day doing this activity that can best tell us, hey, how do you actually execute it? And then it's up to us to document that in Signavio so that everybody can access it, read it, and make it their source of truth for their everyday stuff. It gives clarity on new ways of working. It helps us with onboarding of new people. It helps us training our existing people with the new ways of working. So it gives a little bit of that grounding. It gives a little bit of that stability in a really turbulent time. And it helps us also successfully roll out the other IT tools that we are rolling out, because it gives us that one source of truth, that stable factor. Yeah, so that's where we are at. We have lead deployed 2 markets in October. We are learning from hypercare. We are deploying mass for the rest of the company, so the scope being innovation, manufacturing, and markets, so consumer sales, by Q1 of next year.
Yeah, and it's fair to say that we started the whole Signavio world a little bit down the path. I mean, the S4 program was already underway, and the system integrator, I think, had gone down a very traditional path of identifying very diligently, in fact, the technical design documents, and done that by system process, and there was documentation that was available in Word, maybe with Visio type support to it, etc. And it was quite a traditional SAP implementation. I've seen many of those, and I think to have the insight to then translate that into a Signavio journey, and what we're now doing is accelerating the journey. And I think even the system integrator, if they're honest, will say it's now assisting the journey as we get to the implementation and the need for user training and support and ultimately the adoption. So it is part of that journey, and I think you've seen that it's taken a while and a bit of insight to apply it to it, and hopefully on the next release we'll start a little bit earlier and help it shape some of that requirements design and some of the targeting that we spoke about earlier.
Some governance,
sorry, Hannah, yeah.
And we're adding more scope. So we're adding manufacturing now all of a sudden, where we have translations requirements. We have a completely different set of user that is accessing Signavio for different purposes.
So, jetzt sollten Sie mich hoffentlich hören. Sehr gut. Also theoretisch gesehen ist mit dem Kollegen auf der Bühne besprochen, das Projekt für Sie. Dann sollte das ja soweit passen. Nachdem wir diese ganze Geschichte hier aufzeichnen, wird es immer wieder mal verschiedene Kamerapositionen und Bilder geben, die Sie sehen. Das ist auch Publikum, das ist auch Bühne. Ich kann Sie nur tatsächlich aktuell noch nicht hören, weil das gerade bei mir nicht ankommt. Aber das ist alles gut, Kopfnicken und so ist alles fein. Genau, wir können mal ganz kurz, wenn Sie mal ganz kurz was sagen können, dann sehen wir, ob Sie... Genau. Ja, das ist wunderbar. Sehr gut. Das heißt, es kommt hier auch an. Und das heißt, ich würde Ihnen einfach kurz ein Go geben, wenn die ganze Geschichte startet. So sehen Sie das ja auch in dem Kamerabild, wenn der Kollege dann auf die Bühne geht und die neue Präsentation gestartet wird.
As to what the end-to-end looks like, where you want to innovate and where you don't, where you can go with stock standard and getting agreement around that and where you don't.
Dürfte ich Sie noch einmal kurz bitten, dass Sie noch mal ganz kurz was sagen? Einfach nur kurz mal was erzählen.
It significantly improves the overall effort and process. And around the implementation of some of those system requirements, to be able to clarify them in the context of the end-to-end process makes a very big difference as well. So it can be significantly less painful and significantly less of a costly endeavor. And that's why I think the intro said something about if this is about budget and timing and effort, overruns can be X, right? And you can do that by effectively applying that business judgment alongside it.
Well, and I think one addition as well is that looking at it only from an IT perspective limits your view. We have really enriched our experience by also looking at business process roles, for example, looking at deployments only basing them on SAP roles, and where a business process role did not have an activity in an SAP tool, they fell through the cracks. So we really completed the picture by looking at both and by using Signavio.
Yeah, excellent. And I think there's a super example of where that's happened. We recently also worked on a utility organization, and in that organization they were going to take the version of SAP they had and they were just going to implement the new one. And the IT organization was down a path of saying, effectively, we are going to just, it's simply a renewal.
Yeah.
And we're going to go down the path of implementing the same thing again. And of course, my unfreeze and refreeze discussion came to play. And I spoke to the CIO and said, actually, we can simplify this journey. And he said, oh, you're adding complexity to this. I was very close to getting my sign-off and my tick, right? And now you're adding complexity. And after much conversation, we said, okay, well, let's just have a conversation around it and let's see where it's at. And the CFO eventually said, hey, but this is a great opportunity for me to streamline my finance processes and to make them better. And let's see if we can do that, getting back to basics. And it became known as the Back to Basics program, because we could get 80% of the processes to be standard. And they did get down the path of defining those and having a two-stream process. And we demonstrated to the CIO that by having that two-stream process, with that 80%, you could do them using a very simple, this is the standard, now let's just verify it, while putting a little bit more effort into the innovation. And the net effect was a better system that was easier to maintain over time. And so overall, less cost and less risk. But it does take a little bit of insight to understand and do that. And those transformations are scary words to many individuals. And I think you need to be able to get over some of those scary words. And there's some real examples as to how it's been done and made easy. So, yeah, I truly believe that as you, or many organizations are focused on that transformation that inevitably needs to happen, and these once in 7-year or 12-year ERP implementations need to happen during the course of the next while. Think ahead a little bit, think about process, and really think about it from a perspective of these three things. The targeting of value, getting clarity as to what the standard is versus the variable. Don't ignore the strategic change and variable and saying we're going to just use standard SAP. And get clarity as to how the implementation methods are going to be adapted to do that. Make sure that there's a good integration or alignment between the process, the business and the IT, making sure that you're building this one source of the truth as you're developing it and making that happen. And that the SAP Signavio environment is a way of you building your process management capability and then using that to drive adoption. I've seen too many of these process models created as part of the SAP upfront implementation to establish as-is requirements and then forgotten. And that's an immense waste of energy and time. And they can assist with the process, the implementation process, and de-risking that, but of course they can assist significantly in the adoption, and then you can start adding some of the capability around data and process mining and other things to get that in place. So it's an exciting journey. It can make a significant difference in terms of where you're headed, and very happy to discuss that in more detail with anyone that would be that way. So thanks for your time today. I think we have a minute or two to cover any questions that there might be from the audience to Hannah or myself. Standing under the lights is like being interrogated, so I don't know. Are there any questions? I beg your pardon? What role did the S4 practices play in terms of the ways of working?
Lovely question, thank you. So best practices were, of course, very much limited also to the IT side of things. They were not enriched enough for the end user to truly pick it up and run with it. So any typical end user, at least in our case, could not really use the best practice because also not everybody has an SAP role. So the best practice may not be available for everybody. But very much IT
the best practices are very useful in terms of the system processes. Yeah. I think in some cases they will describe some of the business processes, but ultimately you need that end-to-end value chain and the end-to-end business processes and how all of this integrates to deliver the value that you're trying to achieve. Any other quick questions? I think we're pretty much out of time. Excellent. Well, thank you very much on the second day for being with us today and joining us. Hannah, thank you very much for coming to Berlin and sharing some of your thoughts. And enjoy the rest of the day and enjoy your trips home.